Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. The part two of the Tibet story was pending as per last time with my conversation with Mr. Claude Arpi, who's a authority, if I may say, on Tibet and India-China affairs. And of course, he's written quite a bit, he's spoken quite a bit, and he had a very interesting episode with me where we covered up to the time of the 1962 China-India War. Sir, thank you so much for joining me once again for this in depth analysis of history, which is seldom known by people.
My pleasure.
So, sir, we were there at the time of the war, and of course, a lot of people will attribute the war itself to Indian interference with the Dalai Lama in Tibet and stuff like that. So, let's take it from there. And I would like to ask you is how far do you believe the Tibet story has a connection to the India-China war, sir?
It has, because if you look at the events of March 1959, when there was a uprising of the Tibetan population in Lhasa, and subsequently the Dalai Lama had to take refuge in India. The uprising started on March 10, and on March 17, the Dalai Lama left, and he crossed the border on March 31st in Tawang sector in Kenzimane border post. So if you look just the few months later, the first big clashes took place, one in Ladakh and one in Longju. Longju is today north of Upper Subansari. It was part of Indian territory. At least the perception of the government and the survey of India was part of the um, Indian territory. There was a small garrison of Assam Rifle, and they were attacked. So it was the first casualties. Before that, there was not really a dispute on the border, though China had built the Aksai Road from the mid 50s, actually from 53, 54. And I've documented in one volume of my book the construction of the Aksai Road. But unfortunately, India didn't react for 5 years, thinking maybe that China are very good friends, bye bye, our brothers. So as a result, India only start complaining 1958 about this road. But immediately after the Dalai Lama crossed over into India, it became a big bone of contention that the fact that China had built a road across the Chachin. Very unfortunately, today, uh, China is planning to have a train crossing across the Chachin. And this week only, the Chinese Planning Commission, or the equivalent to the Planning Commission, publish two papers on one on the airports. They are going to build on the plateau 59 new airports, and some are small, some are larger, and some are very close to the border. And also, they are going to build the railway in Tibet. So several lines will be built, in particularly the Sichuan Lhasa railway, which is technically extraordinarily difficult, and but it will be completed in 2030, means in 6, 7, 8 years from now. And at the same time, China is starting a new road cutting across Aksai. And I hope that what has happened in the 50s do not occur again, and that India will not complain and do anything to stop that new infrastructure, which has a strategic implication. I don't need to tell you, but with the front in Ladakh, to have railway lines between Lhasa, Chigatse, and Hotan in Xinjiang is very, very serious development for the security of India. So the same thing happened in the 50s in the and the government at that time kept quiet. But after the Longju incident and the Ladakh incident in August of 1959, India couldn't keep anymore quiet, and it's how the border dispute came in the front, and exchanges of letters between Chu Enlai, the Chinese premier, and Nehru, the Indian prime minister, started in September. So if you continue the story, it will lead eventually to the 1962 war.
Indeed, says, but how a lot of people put a lot of significance into these letters that was exchanged, and one of the mistakes that India made with these letters was to call this particular territory, especially in Ladakh, disputed. And the story is that even today, the Chinese kind of show that to us, that you called it disputed, we didn't. How uh, how much of a significance are these letters that were exchanged between both the leaders actually make today's situation, sir?
They're significant in the sense that they introduced the first time a concept of LAC, and line of actual control, and not anymore IB, international border. And suddenly the territory which was grabbed from India, particularly in Ladakh, through the accession, the IB was forgotten, and everyone, the both government concentrated on the LAC. When Chu Enlai came here in April of 1960, and he suggested some talks would took place during the following months. He also explained what was LAC for him, and
Hmm.
LAC is where each army is at that time. But from 1960 till today, the LAC has never been fixed, except more recently during the talks in Ladakh, some part of it have been fixed. But for example, in Arunachal Pradesh, LAC has not been fixed. So whether we call it LAC and international border also. So whether we call it dispute or not, of course, China is claiming the entire Himachal Pradesh as part of China, which is nonsense. It's cultural nonsense, ethnical nonsense, historical nonsense. China has never been till the foothills. Even the Tibetan had some influence in about 10% of what is today Arunachal. Influence means they have monastery, Tibetan monastery, but which doesn't mean that is part of Tibet before 1959. So it is true that soon after this exchange of letter just triggered that so-called dispute, and India agreed to sit with China and discuss it. Whether there was a chance of solving the issue in 1960, I will not go into that, but that is possible. But since then, the situation has much hardened, and what was possible at that time is not more possible. So, but it's directly linked with Tibet issue also, because the border, the international border, is the McMahon line. McMahon line has been agreed by the Tibetan Prime Minister Loshen Chatra and the Foreign Secretary of India, Sir Henry McMahon. So it shows that it's a India-Tibet border.
Hmm.
It remains India-Tibet border in the sense that India today stands by the McMahon line. So Tibet will always be in it, except if India say, okay, we will give you Arunachal, and we agree to put the border in the foothills, but it's nonsense. It will never happen. So India will continue to stick to the McMahon line. The McMahon line is a line between Tibet and British India. So this is a factor which should not be forgotten when we think of the so-called dispute.
So the war itself, I mean, of course, a time of crisis for India, and a lot has been said about it with regards to whose mistake it was, where did we go wrong, and this and that. Other there's much has been written in two aspects actually. There are two different opinions as to why the war started itself. How do you look at the war and the aftermath, wherein India and China probably just went apart in their own directions for the next some time? How do you see these, the month and a half long war that took place?
I think there are many dimensions in that 1962 war. One, of course, is the border. Uh, it was not demarcated. Not only China did not agree to the McMahon line, but if you go into the nitty gritty, if you go very close to the border, in many places, um, there's different ridges which could be considered as a border. So if you take the Tawang sector, India consider the Tagla Ridge as a border, and China say there's some other ridge, or you stick to the McMahon line. The Tagla Ridge is slightly north, 1 or 2 kilometers. Because in 1913, 1914, when the surveyor went on north of the what is today the McMahon line, they don't have the precise instrument to determine the border, and they didn't have the time also to do so in a very scientific manner. And also the nature sometimes plays tricks to with the surveyor. The It's not a straight line. In some places like northern Sikkim is quite a straight line, but in Arunachal it's not the case. So that is one factor. Another factor of the 1962 war was that Mao Zedong was facing a lot of internal problems. And by the beginning of 1962, he was more or less out. There was a power struggle within the party between Mao on one side and Lin Biao is defense minister, and on the other side, Liu Shaoqi, the Chinese president, Deng Xiaoping, and other leaders. So after the Great Leap Forward, 5960, 61, during which 40 or 50 million of Chinese died of starvation, Mao was in a very weak position within the party. So to come back, that 1962 war helped him to come back. He gave a sort of a slap to India. He couldn't have gone over the 4 weeks that he invaded India. So ceasefire was declared on 21st of November 62, and they withdrew. By December, they had withdrawn beyond the McMahon line. So, but internally, it reinforced greatly Mao Zedong and Lin Biao, his defense minister. So that was another factor. Another factor also was the rivalry with Russia, Soviet Union, and there were at the same time in October there was a conflict in Cuba about the missile that the Soviet Union had put it in against the United States. So at that time, Soviet Union was more in favor of India. At the beginning of that crisis, they wanted India's support for the Cuba. So that was another factor. So there's many different factors which have come into play, and there was also, of course, the Tibetan rebellion, which was going on full swing. And I should add also that the fact that the Panchen Lama, the second most important Tibetan leader, Lama, the second to the Dalai Lama, remained in Tibet, and many Tibetans at that time considered him as a traitor, but he was not a traitor. He was a great patriot, and he published a 70,000 character petition addressed to Chu Enlai, the Chinese premier, in which, if you translate it into English, it will come 130, 140 pages. And this petition detail, I think it's the first time in the history of the Communist Party, at least after 1949, where the party was criticized by a leader supposedly to be pro-China, and he was in the minute details. He described the bad time that the Tibetan had between 1950-51 when the Chinese invaded Tibet and 1962. So that was a very strong critique of Mao Zedong. It was published in July 62. So it's also certainly another factor that to make this, the Tibetan forget that this has happened, that to start the war, and at the same time to complete their control over the Tibetan plateau.
That's, I mean, it's China is something that we need to understand has been a lot, and their reactions has been a lot to do with their internal politics with regards their external affairs, and that comes out. So post the war finishes, I mean, India, at least there was no dream left of having an influence in Tibet, and it's an interesting scenario where we literally before the war we withdrew our high commissions and everything from Tibet. So now post the war, Tibet was completely a no-go zone for India. And how do you see the evolution of Indian foreign policy towards China and towards Tibet between the 60s, let's say 62 to about 71 when the war happened, considering very well the fact now known that the Pakistanis and the Chinese colluded during the 65 war. So the Chinese did not stop there and they wanted to actually go ahead and do another sort of a game with India in 65. How do you think the Indian foreign policy and Indian reaction to this kind of stuff actually took place, sir?
I think that you have the 1962 war. So there's another factor that China developed the infrastructure in Tibet for two reasons. One reason was to fight against the Tibetan guerrilla, and the second one was to prepare for a conflict, an eventual conflict with India. So by that time, they had full end of 62. By the end time the war stopped, they had China had full control over Tibet. And Mao Zedong said something very interesting in one of the meeting early October, I think 6 or 7 of October 62, when they were preparing for the war. He had called all the marshals and the generals and all the people, the PLA, senior leaders in Beijing, and he said that with this war we will have 30 or 40 years of peace, because India will take such a slap that they will keep quiet for that. So I will not say that India kept quiet for that long, but it is true that there was utter confusion in Delhi. People didn't realize what has happened, because till the end, you know that the Krishna Menon, the defense minister, met Chen Yi, Marshal Chen Yi, the minister of foreign affairs of China in Geneva in July, and told him that there will be no war. We are friends, we are brothers. We will be no war until the morning of October 20. Everyone came with a message to the troops on the front that there will be no war. Even the General Bien Cole was a four-corps commander, visited on 6 or 7 of October. He visited the front. He went on the Namkachu, and he said that political leadership believed that there will be no war. So that was a shock. That was a terrible shock. I think Nehru never fully recovered. So you can't speak about foreign policy during his 2 last years, between 62 and May 64 when he passed away, because everyone was lost, including the Ministry of External Affairs. Vis-à-vis Tibet, it meant the closure of all the Indian presence in Tibet. The Panchil Agreement, which was signed in April 54, lapsed in April 1962. So the three trade agencies in Yatong, near Sikkim border, in Gyantse, near Lhasa, and in Gartok in western Tibet was closed. So progressively, all this Indian presence, which was very valuable for trade and for diplomatic as well as intelligence, were closed. And in December of 62, for a reason that I've never been able to elucidate, and because I've never been given access to the file, I don't know, maybe they have lost the file, but someone in the ministry decided to close down the Consulate General in Lhasa. So from that time, there is no more Indian presence. And so you can't speak about a foreign policy when suddenly, in a few months' time, the entire diplomatic Indian officials posted in Tibet had to return to India. And of course, it changed in 64 after Nehru passed away. Lal Bahadur Shastri became the prime minister, and he took a much stronger stand. And during the Pakistan war, he called the Indian representative in Delhi, Mr. Chakapa, and he said, "Now I'm going to Tashkent, and when I come back, I will officially recognize your government in exile in Dharamsala." Unfortunately, it never returned. So when I wrote that small book, The Karma of Tibet, many small things like that took place. So Indira Gandhi became the prime minister. She was not as aware and as strong than Lal Bahadur Shastri was. She became strong in 71 when the conflict with Pakistan erupted and India had to liberate Bangladesh. But in the first years, she couldn't grasp the importance of Tibet. But later on, as you said, that China started siding Pakistan, and I think also it's the American help to put together Pakistan and China. During the war, at the end of the war, on 19th of November, Nehru wrote 2 letters to Kennedy begging for help. So Nehru, the non-aligned leader, suddenly became aligned with the United States. He asked Kennedy, supply weapons, supply planes, supply equipment we need. So it was partially agreed. And the American administration sent Robert McNamara to Delhi on 22nd of November. And they discussed some support, but the main issue was that you have to take the occasion to be friends with Pakistan. So there was a lot of pressure on India when it was at the weakest after the war. It's so weak at the end of November 1962 to make friends with Pakistan. And it was the American who really tried. And again in 1971, when Kissinger went via Pakistan clandestinely first time to China to prepare Nixon's visit of February 72, there was no doubt that in Pakistan, China, and America were good friends. because Kissinger wanted to open up China and wanted the American to establish normal relations with Mao Zedong. So in February 72, Nixon went, met Mao Zedong, and one of the consequences was that the guerrilla, Tibetan guerrilla, which had been financed and trained by the CIA, had to stop. They were based in northern Nepal, in Mustang, and they all the support they were getting from the Americans stopped because of this rapprochement between China and the US. But Pakistan was already a good friend of America. So there's so many things that come into play. So at that time, India couldn't. I mean, India had his hand full with Bangladesh to liberate Bangladesh, which India did very well and very fast. And between December 3rd and December 16, Bangladesh was liberated. And interestingly, the Tibetan participated. In November 62, India had started a special frontier force regiment with Tibetans that was started by the IB, Mr. Malik, of the director of Intelligence Bureau. And they were supposed to be used for going back to Tibet and help India to regain some of the place which were lost. But ultimately, they end up helping India in Bangladesh in the Chittagong Hills. So 3,000 Tibetan participated, and under Indian Brigadier S.S. Uban, they did quite well, and many of them passed away, died during the short time operation. So that was another connection with Tibet. So, but yeah, we can't rewrite history.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir. You know, you mentioned the Special Frontier Force, and the interesting part about the Special Frontier Force was that it was actually created to spy and to have subversive activities within China. Of course, there was also India and US cooperation to measure the Chinese uh, nuclear, activities as well in 64, 65. So there was a lot of cooperation between India and US against China at that particular point of time. What happened that changed everything, sir? And why was India left on the side?
I think mainly because of what I said about the. I mean, that you mentioning that operation in Nanda Devi in '65,
Yes.
Tibetans were used as a support force for carrying all this device and all the equipment and on the base camp in Nanda Devi, and but the change occurred when Kissinger, 1970, he started contacting Chinese and said that we want to regularize our relation. And 71, he went clandestinely to Beijing. So that was the big changes. So of course, in 1965, the U.S. was very worried of the nuclear test, the Chinese test in Lopnor, in Xinjiang, and that's why they tried to install that nuclear device on the Nanda Devi. They lost the device. We still don't know what has happened with the device. 1 year later, they went again and they couldn't find it. But that was more a short-term operation, one-time operation that India helped. I think India must have help also, but still classify for the U2 operation in Tibet when they start mapping Tibet with the U2. And one base in Orissa through Mr. Biju Patnaik was used to sometime for the U2 to. Now we have the story of the balloons in the media every day, but at that time it's the U2, and also one U2 got shot down by the Russian. But I think the American got quite accurate map of Tibet, of the Tibetan plateau. And I don't know if they exchange or they share it with India. This I don't know, but they were getting quite a good intelligence with their U2. So as India helped just maybe to facilitate the U2 operation, one couple of times, not very often, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, India has also carried out its own mapping operations in that region. It's quite classified, but there are reports of overflights conducted by Indian Air Force as well in its reconnaissance aircraft going
For
towards that
the Indian Air Force, they flew over Tibet before the war.
before and after.
Uh,
After,
not much, but extensively
yeah.
between 1960 to 62 during the war and a few months after only, and they knew that there was no Chinese Air Force. Chinese Air Force had been decimated because part of it went to Korea, and the other part, they had no spare parts because of the conflict with Soviet Union. All the PLA Air Force had got their plane from the Soviet Union, and when the conflict between Soviet Union and China started in after 1960, 60, 61, the entire supply of spare parts stopped. And that's why most of the planes were grounded. And the Indian squadron who flew over Tibet for 3 years and regularly and mapping everything, this Canberra plane with special camera. I think they were coming from the US, the camera, but they mapped Tibet, but they discovered that there was absolutely no Air Force, and that was one of the biggest blunder during the 1962 war. Though the government was informed, the air headquarters knew about it, they informed Mr. Krishna Menon. Nothing was done because everyone thought we are friends with China. So, but the non-use of the Air Force was certainly the greatest blunder, and it could have changed totally the war. And in many of the battles, whether in Rezangla on the Kailash Range in Ladakh or in Walong in Lohit sector in Arunachal, Nifa at that time, or even in Bomdila, if the Indian Air Force had intervened for dropping, for bombarding the rear guard, and it could have totally changed the war. And that scar of 1962, which is still there today, it could have been different. But as I say, we cannot rewrite history. That was a decision. We should just learn from the blunders. Many blunders were committed. That was one of the biggest, the non-use of the Air Force. But we should learn and not do it again. That's all. It's my views.
Indeed. Indeed. So let's go to the 70s. Now, 70s were an interesting time because you had, of course, the rapprochement between the Americans and the Chinese happening. There was a bit of a Soviet clash with the Chinese in '69 in the Ussuri River, where the Chinese got decimated pretty badly. 70 was also the time where India signed a agreement of friendship with the Soviet Union. So a lot of power balance kind of changed in the region, which was pretty much leveled. It got flipped. How do you characterize the 70s, wherein China was also going through its own turmoil with regards to its post these revolutions and the aftermath of those revolutions, and there was a leadership change, and there's a whole lot that happened in the 70s and early 80s. How do you see this whole the India China angle during that time?
I think nothing happened much. In 1976, an Indian ambassador was nominated, but before that, there was only chargé d'affaires. And
Yeah.
as you said, because of the Cultural Revolution and turmoil, there was no question for China of conducting a proper external affair, and India still had the scar of 1962 and was not keen to engage China. So it changes slightly in 1976 with the nomination of an ambassador in Beijing, but still it didn't. Till 1988, when Rajiv Gandhi went to Beijing and met Deng Xiaoping, uh, and it was just after the Samdong-Shu incident in Arunachal Pradesh, where we were very close to have another war. So that's relaxed the but relaxing means nothing also, because each time there's a relaxing, China will has been using it. So I don't know what is. It's very, in one way it's good that there's a better relation, but at the same time, if you look more recently of the visit of the Prime Minister to Wuhan and the Chinese President to Mahabalipuram, there was a relaxing, and everyone thought, oh, that time we'll be friends. And in May of 2020, the Ladakh confrontation started. So that is the issue. That can we trust China, or if we trust, we have to be very extremely careful to have a plan B and to think that maybe it's not like it appears. So that's the history of the relation between India and China.
So I
And
want to ask you, sorry, please.
no, no, tell me.
I want to ask you a larger question. So now, when we look at India China, the issue of Tibet came up across in the 50s. Then we had the war in 62. We had a battle on the border in Nathula in 67, where a lot of Chinese lost their lives. We had issues in 75. So it's been basically a decade on decade sort of an affair. Then we had 88, 80, 86, 88, when the, Rongju issue happened, that lasted on for 5 years. It finally got settled somewhere early 90s. uh, 2004 onwards, again there was issues that started up where there was incursions within India in 2013, and then you got again 2020. So these are the various kind of issues that have taken place. uh, this is like a cycle. The Chinese would show a hand of friendship and then, you know uh, go back and backstab and, create issues and get into a confrontation again. In the current scenario, sir, with all that baggage of history, with all the baggage that we carry between both the countries, do you think that in any future, discussion, would this baggage be carried along, or is it, will it be tried to, at least by the Chinese? I don't think it'll be done by the Indians, to be kept on the side. One of the major things why am I asking you this is because the Tibet issue is going to be a burning issue post the current Dalai Lama's eventual, a demise that would happen, sir. How do you see this entire thing unfolding? Because this particular the Dalai Lama incident it's going to be, fueling another fire in the entire game.
I don't know the future, but I can see that it's true that there are cycles.
Yeah.
Uh, I hope that India has learned also from the past. And actually, an interesting development has been that army also has been involved into the talks in the negotiation on the lake in Moldo in Chushul. So army is more down to earth. They know that 1 meter is 1 meter. No, the diplomat they will not know. So actually, ultimately, I think everyone has to work together, not to leave it to just to the diplomat who believe, oh, now they have become good guys. We can make friends and we can sort out all the issue. Issue will take time to sort out, and especially the border issue. But since 2020, since the COVID, and after that the Ladakh confrontation, I think many things have changed in the world, and many uh, people, included in US or in Europe, see China very differently. And there was a frenzy in Europe and America to do business with China. And whatever the diplomats or the government could say, business would prevail because they know control over the business. And Elon Musk can go anytime and do business with China if he find it that he'll make money. Now slowly the business find that they are not making so much money and that the situation is very unstable. At every level the situation is unstable and the economy is not doing well, and many people, many big company have start moving out. Even rich Chinese, they are moving out to Singapore or other places. So overall situation in China is not very bright. And but propaganda is still there, so they will project that China is doing so well and it's a model for the world. That 2 3 days ago, Xi Jinping was giving a speech. His speeches are always termed important speech. So his important speech said that there is no model superior to the communist model in the world, and it will be a model for everyone in the future. So everyone has to stick to and follow the party. Now people are not following so much. Yesterday I read in Hunan, where the COVID started, there was 10,000 retired people who went on a demonstration and complaining about
Insurance.
their retirement pension and everything. So people are start demonstrate with whiteboard so that they are not caught, or demonstrating otherwise. So and now the business people see this also. So it was a turning point, 2020, I think. So this has to be kept in mind when negotiating with China on anything, on the border, on other on businesses. So, but still, the India trade balance is getting more and more in favor of China. Maybe it will change. Last week, India banned again some Chinese apps. The Americans are tightening also with all the semiconductor. For example, this balloon who went so much into the media, now they will find out sometime that most of the part have been originated from the US and stolen or given to the technology to China. So there is a period of where people should really get aware that China is not always playing the game in a fair manner. So I think it's coming up. I think it will change many things when.
That's, I must say, or I believe you, by the way, about the balloon, that it might have almost 90% of the technology or the parts made in USA, or, something like that. So, my last question to you, and this is something I'm always curious about, the 1962 war. Uh, the Chinese never came out and said how many people they lost. What was their body count? How many? What was the losses of the Chinese soldiers that took place? Uh, we saw them declaring a measly number after Galwan, uh, but they've never come out and said about 62, sir. Would a figure, if it does come out of the Chinese, an original figure, a true figure, would it change the thought process of the war and who won actually? Would it be as significant as some analysts believe that it would be?
I think we will not get the correct figure, but they have given very detailed figures of all the equipment lost, the everything, how many vehicles, how many guns, and how many people died, and from the Indian side and as well as from Chinese side. But like in Galwan, where they say four when there's a 40 or more, you can multiply by 10. It's like when they say that one or two people died of COVID, and when we know that lakhs of people died of COVID. So we will not get easily the correct figure, because it's not tomorrow that the archives are going to be open. But uh, I think during some of the battles in Rezangla or in Wallon, they lost several hundred uh, soldiers there. But we will, like Galwan, we will not know.
We'll never know.
So I think without having the Chinese figures, we should honor the people who died in fought very well in Rezangla, in all the Kailash range, in Ladakh, near Shushul, near the Spangong Gap, as well as in Arunachal. So we should honor them and say, okay, but to get the Chinese figures, I think we will never really get it, because they are master at hiding these figures. 2 3 weeks ago, there was this Galwan was in the news in China, and first Xi Jinping said that he inspected Galwan. What means inspected Galwan? He spoke 2 minutes online. When Indian Prime Minister wants to go to the Ladakh, he goes to Ladakh and speak to the troop and have tea or thing. He will stay a few hours because of acclimatization, and he will come back. Similarly with Defense Minister or other officials. They go on and meet people. There, they did 5 minute online inspection. So he asked the troop, do you eat fresh vegetable? And they all say yes. And that the inspection was finished. So China is a big problem. Why can't Xi Jinping or any of his member of the standing committee or the Politburo go there, or people of the Central Military Commission go there and meet the troops? They never. So that's an issue they don't. So regarding the number of casualty, we will not know. And also that they say that family of one of the first casualty went to Galwan and met people and saw the thing, but they have never said the name of the person, because if they name that family, other family may start complaining or speaking to the foreign journalist or saying, what about our son who also died? So they say one family has gone there and met the people who are serving there, met the officer, but they didn't show the face of the person and they didn't give the name of the person. So they are scared that if one person names is given, the other will also, they know they have lost their son, their family of the people who died, Chinese who died. In India, it's open, 20. We know Colonel Santosh Babu, Mahavir Chakra, the other also got decorated, and
That's what
but
it is.
China will never know.
That's what it is. Exactly, sir. Sir, this is obviously, we've covered through a track of history which is seldom known and but is affecting us today. It's part of our lives today, and we are reliving history. As a matter of fact, if I may say that, every year in October, the conversation picks up. Is this the time that the Chinese will used to come and attack and repeat in 1962? That scare that you've spoken about, the scar of 1962, still remains with us, no matter what. Uh, so, of course, my conversation with you on Tibet is something that I want to have with you next, where we will think about and ponder about how Tibet will move forward, considering, as I said, the Dalai Lama and the the next Lama, if there is something that is chosen from here, or how does that happen, because normally it takes about a decade or something like that for things to actually materialize within this system. But how will this game go forward with the West also jumping into the fray and trying to put pressure onto the Chinese on the Tibet issue? But till that time, sir, this has been a beautiful, wonderful talk, and it's always lovely to talk to you, to learn from you, because there are certain hidden aspects of understanding that you bring about, which cannot be read through a book, because it's a different game when you hear it from someone like you who's been around the place and actually studied the game, because you're putting it across in a perspective which would be easy for us to understand. So I'd like to thank you for that, and of course, invite you once again to have this discussion on Tibet. Till then, sir, Jai Hind, and thank you.
Uh, Thank you.